there's a mode of perception and action that unites you socially. So you can be united psychologically, then you're not a house that's built on sand, and you can be united socially. Imagine there's a spirit that characterizes that unity. So the biblical corpus is an attempt to portray that spirit. And it does it using a technique called metonymy. So metaphor is something being something else. This is like that, or this is that. It's a way of taking what you know to explain what you don't know. But metonymy is a technique where you take one story that seems to have one moral and you juxtapose it with another, and maybe do that with a sequence of stories. And then there's an implication that there's a meta story that emerges across all the ordered stories. And that's what the biblical corpus is, because no one wrote it, not in any real sense. And the processes by which it aggregated are mysterious. They extend over thousands and thousands of years. But here's what the book is. It's a library, not a book. Here's what the library is. There's a proclivity towards monotheistic unity that unites us psychologically and socially. And it emerges out of a plurality of potential gods. It emerges from the bottom up. Now, you could argue that it descends from the top down too, but I'm not going to get into that at the moment. The question emerges, how do you understand that unifying, animating spirit? And the answer is, well, it's beyond our comprehension, and we can more or less approach it with a story. So here's some examples. So in the story of Adam and Eve, God is the spirit that you walk with when you're unself-conscious in a properly tended garden. And you might say, well, do you believe in that? It's like, well, do you have a garden? Most people want a garden. They want a house. They want a little fenced-off plot. They want to be able to go back there and relax and recreate, right? Unself-consciously. Okay, so whatever's happening when you're there, that's what that is. That's that walking unself-consciously with the spirit of the paradisal garden. So that's one picture of God. And then in the story of Cain and Abel, you have another picture, which is God is the spirit that punishes you if you make poor sacrifices. You say, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, are you giving it your all or not? Or are you playing both sides of the fence? Are you just, chipping in when you have to and trying to go along for a free ride? And that's what happens with Cain. He gets all bitter about it because his sacrifices are rejected. So God is the spirit that rejects false sacrifices. And what happens to Cain? He gets bitter and then murderous, and then his descendants become genocidal. That's the Cain and Abel story in like 2 paragraphs. So then you have the story of Noah. So in Noah, God is the spirit that calls the wise of his time, because Noah is portrayed as someone wise in his generations, right? So for his time and place, he's a wise man. He has the sense that the storms are coming and it's time to batten down the dam hatches. And so like in your own life, maybe your eyes are open to some degree and you think a storm is coming. You have an intuition that a storm is coming. Do you prepare or do you ignore that? Because those are your options. If you prepare, then you're manifesting faith in that spirit. So that's the spirit in Noah. In the Tower of Babel, you have God as the spirit that punishes the technological pretensions of mankind. So men get together to build a tower that stretches to the heavens. That's the Tower of Babel. And they want to do that to replace the transcendent. So they want to replace the mystery of being with their own presumptions. And what happens is no one can talk to each other anymore. And that's the state we're in right now. That's why Matt Walsh can make a movie that's entitled, What is a Woman? We can't even agree on that. That's the Tower of Babel. And so then you have the story of Abraham, and God is presented in that story as the spirit that calls the overprotected and privileged, that's Abraham, to the adventure, to the catastrophic adventure of their life. Because that's what happens to Abraham. He's 83, he lives in his father's tent, eats peeled grapes. He doesn't have to do anything. And this voice makes itself manifest within him and says, get the hell up off your comfortable bed, get out there in the world. suffer your adventure. And, Abraham's life is just, he leaves. And it's not like it's no promised land for him. It's like starvation and tyranny and war. And the Egyptian rulers conspire to steal his wife. And, it's brutal life. But it's life, it's adventure. And so then you think, well, all of this is an attempt to characterize Yahweh. And this is the Jewish God with whom the Jews have a relationship. All of these stories are an attempt to characterize that. And so you could say, well, what is the spirit that you walk with unself-consciously in the well-tended garden, and the spirit that calls you to adventure, and the spirit that punishes tyranny? That would be the Exodus story. What do they have in common? Well, that's Yahweh, whatever that is. And so then there's an attempt to characterize the nature of that spirit. And then there's a twist on that in the New Testament, which is an amazing twist. It's an amazing twist, because the conclusion is that the spirit of Yahweh, portrayed in all these different ways, is the same spirit that calls people to voluntarily bear the catastrophe of their life. And that's the union of God and man. That's the idea. So it's a hypothesis. It's like, well, is that the same God? So imagine that, you're confronting your horizon of possibility and tragedy as bravely and honestly as you can. Well, that's the spirit of Yahweh making itself manifest within you. And if you do that properly, then you can bear up under that load. So that's a way better story than power. So, and it looks to me like it's looking at it psychologically. Try to strip it to the degree that it's possible of its religious overtones. You can't strip it completely, because, there's an open question. So imagine that there's a pattern of existence that, quells your anxiety and gives you hope and unites people. Well, then you have an open question is, well, how much does that reflect the structure of being itself? There's a Greek idea of the logos that's intrinsic in the world, that there's an order in the world, right, that we can discover, and that makes itself manifest from the bottom up. And that's the logos of the world, the logic of the world. And it's certainly possible that the logic of the world as expressed in human existence is the same as this spirit of Yahweh that's transmuted in the New Testament into the logos. And what happened, I did a lecture about this at Ephesus in Turkey. That was fun, which was where the logos was discussed 3,000 years ago, the Greek logos. So what you have in Western culture is you have this Greek idea that there's an intrinsic order in the universe, bottom up sort of. And then the Christians come along and say, well, there's also an intrinsic order in the psychological realm. And then Western culture is the juxtaposition of those two, the claim that those are the same thing. And so that would be the same claim as if you honestly and truthfully confront the tragic limitations of your life, you'll discover the truth of the implicit order, and that will redeem you. And that's the fundamental claim of science, for example. So even science, insofar as it's a practice, is embedded in this tradition. So, well, that's a way better story. It's the greatest story ever told, man.